morning. Good morning.
Shah! Help punished.
Today's Parshat Shavua / Haggadah Shir. Sponsored by Murray and Clara Shore. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Murray's father, Nachum Yosef ben Yitzchak Isaac Zichrono Livracha, and Murray's mother also Bracha Bat Yitzchak Zichrono Livracha. Clara Liz Gordon's father, Yoel Tzvi ben Avram Pinchas Neshama Shel Avon Aliyah. We do thank you indeed for sponsorship. We're supposed to do Haggadah, and I see more oranges in front of you than Haggadahs here. Right? You have an Haggadah.
The oranges were cheaper than the Haggadahs.
We know it by heart.
You know it by heart. Wow. That's impressive. Okay, so let's start. There's something very unique about the whole the Seder night. The Seder night. We focus on the Pesach, Matzah, Moror. We don't have the Paschal Lamb. Paschal Lamb was a very unique sacrifice. If you think about it, there's a structure for how things were done in the temple in the Beit HaMikdash. You had a morning service and an evening service, and any other korban would be brought in between. So basically, the activities in the temple were daytime activities. Anything taking place at night was simply if you had remains that had to be burned, for example. But main activities were during the day, and main activities were taking place when it comes to sacrifices between the daily morning sacrifice and the evening one. There's an exception to the rule where you have a sacrifice being brought after you bring the evening sacrifice. There's an exception that the eating is designated specifically for the night, and that is the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach seems to be a nighttime sacrifice. It cannot be slaughtered at night, but by the fact that it is offered and processed after the evening sacrifice, there's an indication there that this is really a nighttime activity. Now, the idea, the symbolism is that we are entering into a holiday that will turn night into day. That's what the Spirit is about. Me'afela le'ora. And so the first thing we have to remember that this is an uplifting time. It is a time when we have the ability to renew. And renewal is quite often a very personal process when we have difficulties, we have moments of darkness, and we know that there is light, and we have the opportunity to tap into that light. Seder night, Pesach, is really supposed to be a time of light. Now, some of you are going to wonder, wait a second, so why am I in the closet the whole day, right, cooking for the past 6 weeks, right? Why am I cleaning so much if this is a time of light? The question's a valid one, but let me tell you what the goal is, and then we'll try to figure out how to get to that goal. The goal is to make it a time of light. Now, it is also a time when we focus very much on transmitting. It's for the next generation, right? If you think about it. We talking about the Exodus. Believe it or not, every single day we actually have this mitzvah of talking about all day. So what's so special about the Seder night? Well, the Seder night, this is not a conversation we have with ourselves, but it's a night when we want to transmit it to the next generation. How do you transmit to the next generation? Well, when you feel it, when you really feel the experience, right? It's interesting. We read in the Haggadah, Chayav Adam Lirot Atzmo Kilu Yatsa Mitzrayim. And the Rambam tells us, no. It's not Chayav Adam Lirot, it's Chayav Adam Leheraot. To look, it's an appearance. You act it out. Or in some communities, they would actually take the matzah and put it on their back and walk around the table, right? Some people have all kind of shows, right? I saw advertised that at Chocolate Charm you could buy chocolates that look like the plagues, right? Now, I'm not telling you that I'm going to be doing that, but the concept of acting it out and making a scene out of it is then you experience it. You feel you are actually there. You actually are experiencing the Geulah. When you experience, it is easier for the next generation to be inspired. They feel it. That is what the Seder night is about. Now, we ourselves have an obligation, because when you want to have gratitude for the Exodus, it is not gratitude for the past, but rather gratitude for what we are going through, because we have to relive it, right? But these are a few ideas that we have to be mindful in the Geula, right? The idea that it's darkness to light, feeling the experience itself, being sure that you have the ability to transmit. These are the main themes of the Seder itself. And we're going to go through a few sections and try to point out how those sections indicate that idea. Now, when it comes to the Seder, sometimes I wonder if when we are dealing with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, if we are not doing it all wrong. In other words, it appears that the ideal way of preparing for the 3-year-old and 4-year-old to the Seder is by not telling him anything. Somehow, if we would be able to conceal from the 3-year-old and the 4-year-old, or perhaps the 2-year-old, the whole idea that there is this incredible evening that's coming, we would perhaps really maximize the impact of the evening. Because imagine, right, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old coming to the Seder, and it is a child that does not remember from last year exactly what took place, and he sees this incredible meal, and then right after the Kiddush, everyone goes in, washes their hands, comes back, and what do they eat? A small potato or a piece of celery, right, or a radish. Imagine the impact it will have on the child, and then the manishtana is going to be a real, what on earth is going on here? You know, this is crazy. What's going on here? And when the child experiences something so traumatic, not to have his food, or if he gets to peek at the bread and realize that the bread is flat, right, that will be a real manishtana. That's most probably the ideal manishtana. Now, I mentioned at a very young age, because later on they come to a stage that they do remember things from the last year, right? And the child's going to complain, why is it that last year you had marshmallows for us at the Seder, and this year you're not planning? I've dealt with that. In other words, they do remember. But at a very, very young age, they're not going to remember. Imagine the impact of that night. And it is very possible that we can understand a few of the questions of the Manishtana based on that. You know, for example, the Arvanel tells us that the norm was, once upon a time, that when you had some experience that was near death and you survived, you would bring a Korban Todah, a thanksgiving offering. And we are given, a person went on a journey, a person went through some kind of medical issue, a person came out of jail. There are circumstances where you bring a Korban Todah. Now, the Korban Todah itself was a fascinating sacrifice because it came with a lot of loaves. A lot of loaves. You would walk home with about 36 loaves. You would offer 40, right? And these were large loaves. Offer 40. The Kohen would take 4. You walk home with 36. Most probably, my feeling is that they would rip off from a supermarket one of those buggies, right? You see them sometimes in some neighborhoods more than others. That you see them, they would most probably, skip getting back the quarter and take from the Bet HaMikdash 36 loaves, bring it home. The problem is that you have to finish it by that night. So 36 loaves, how do you finish it by? So you invite people. They tell them, guess what, ladies and gentlemen, you announce in the neighborhood, there's a Todah, there's a Thanksgiving meal, please come assist me in eating these loaves. Now some of these loaves were matzah, some of them were chametz. This is how the Torah describes it. Some were matzah, some were chametz. So this was a big event, and people would come, the neighbors would come, and it would be very exciting. When the 2-year-old or the 3-year-old walks into the Seder and sees a lot of people there and sees a lot of excitement, he feels and he thinks, you know what, we are going to experience now, most must be a Thanksgiving offering, a Thanksgiving evening, a evening someone had some kind of event. And by the way, the whole idea of a Kiddush, people sponsor Kiddush in honor of something. The idea is that you ask the person, what's it in honor of? And they tell you, say, oh, Baruch Hashem, thank goodness, that's such a wonderful event. That's the idea of a Kiddush. And it originates from this idea that you would bring people together to eat these breads, and they would ask, oh, this is a Korban Todah, you brought a Korban Todah today? Yes. Oh, these are the breads left over? Yes. What was the event you are celebrating? And you would show, well, I went to the Far East, I picked up some spices, and the boat ride was not so smooth, but Baruch Hashem, I made it back okay. Oh, Hodel Hashem Kitov, Mizmar L'Sayda, Real Hashem Kolar. So that's the idea of expressing your gratitude to God Almighty and sharing it with others. The child coming to the Seder night believes that here I am for a Thanksgiving gathering. But he looks on the table and he peeks under the challah cover, and guess what? What's missing? At a regular Torah event, there would be loaves of matzah and loaves of chametz. Here, all the loaves, Seder night, are
Matzah.
Manishtana halayla zemikol haleilot. What is this night different than all other nights when there are so many people gathered? Here, and I expect it to be a Thanksgiving gathering. Shebachol haleilot. All other nights when there are so many people here, what you find on the table, the korban toda, the loaves are chametz and matzah. Halayla zekulo matzah. This is how the Barbanel explains the question, the first question of the Manishtana. But it gives you an understanding that if the child walks in without knowing anything, there's indeed a surprise. And I could tell you early memories I have of life, right? That I go back, it wasn't far from here, it was on Fleetwell, which is south of Finch. I still remember the Seder night of my older brother grabbing the afikoman and concealing it under the couch and putting his finger on his lips, meaning you keep quiet, right? Don't say anything. So there are memories. The impact that the Seder night could have on the next generation is quite powerful, and that's basically how we transmit. It may have an impact on them. As they mature a little bit, you want them to be familiar with the text, and most probably the norm was that the Shabbat afternoon before the Seder, kids would sit down and read the Haggadah. Why would they read the Haggadah? To prepare to become familiar with it. And that's how the old Ashkenazi tradition developed, and some people up till today still have that custom, that they read the Haggadah on the Shabbos before the Seder, right? Ad kan Shabbos Hagadol. That's where they ended. Where does that tradition originate from? Most probably it was an educational tool, and that's for a later stage when they are familiar already, but at least they should know what it is about. Feeling the experience, in other words, when we say the Haggadah itself, that you should know that this is not just something that occurred in the past, but we have to feel that if we did not merit at that time the Exodus, if not for that Exodus, guess what? We would still be in Egypt, right? Doesn't mean physically, doesn't mean spiritually. Whatever it is, the fact is that, therefore, we are not here to just talk about history. We are supposed to feel something. And when you are supposed to feel something, even if the information is known, you repeat it nevertheless. In other words, if I'm giving a history lecture, I'm not going to go ahead and repeat information more than once. Some teachers do that. But in general, you say it once, the students know it, mission accomplished. But if we are here in an exercise of feeling, we want to experience something, we're going to repeat it, right? Because the first time it might not have that impact. We have to talk about it, and talk about it in detail. And therefore, due to the fact that Haggadah tells us, due to the fact that we have to feel that experience, mitzvah aleinu lesaper, there's a mitzvah, and kol hamarba, and the more you talk about it, the better. And we share this story of the great scholars and Bnei Brak sitting there and spending the night discussing the Haggadah. You gotta feel it. How do you feel it? Discuss it in detail, analyze it, understand it, think about it, perhaps meditate. This is what it is all about. There's a story in my family, very well known, that my father has a sister, but he had an older sister as well. He had an older sister, no longer alive for some time, and they were very bright individuals. My father was a bright man. His sister in Israel, she should be healthy, is a very bright woman. I mentioned here several times that she worked as the secretary in the Knesset of the Speaker of the House, very accomplished woman. But supposedly the oldest sister, and Nechame was her name, was the brightest of all. Supposedly. There's a debate because some say my father was bright, but we'll put that aside for some other time, and we'll share the family stories in detail perhaps another time. And Nechame, my grandfather would say she was the brightest of all. Why, he tells us? So he would share with us the story. Nechame eventually worked for the United Nations in Nairobi. But then they moved her to Paris, and she was fluent. Some say that she wrote poetry only in 9 languages. Some claim it was much more. So there's a debate, but a very fascinating woman indeed, Nechame. So the story my grandfather shared with us is as follows: that they're sitting there at the Seder night in Lithuania, and they had a lot of guests there, and 2-year-old Nechame is sitting there in the high chair listening to the Haggadah. They reach a point in the Haggadah, and they say to Nechame, it's late, it's time to go to sleep. So this is a 2-year-old. And the 2-year-old responds, wait a second, we just read about Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Yehuda, that were up the whole night. I can stay up a little bit longer as well. This is what the 2-year-old responds. So this is what the story here is presented not for children to try to extend their bedtime, but to tell us that these scholars who knew it all were nevertheless analyzing every detail because they wanted to experience it. Now, when we talked several times about the fact that the 4 cups of wine symbolize 4 stages of redemption, right? And the rabbis in the Jerusalem Talmud link the 4 cups to 4 words that describe the redemption that appear in the beginning of Parshat Vayera, V'hotzeti, V'itzalti, V'galti, V'lakachti, where God says, I will take you out, I will save, I will redeem you, and I will take you as a nation. And each one of those cups relate to one of those Lishonot Shel Geula. And the first one, the Maharal explains that don't think that the first one means that the Hotzeti, that they left physically, but rather it was a mindset, that the first step of redemption is for the Jew to realize, I do not belong here. This is not my home, right? This is a wonderful country, right? We're very, very grateful, right? And we believe in making a contribution. No question about that. But this is not home. That is the first step of the redemption. And our ancestors in Egypt, yes, they were second-class citizens. Yes, they were mistreated, but they viewed themselves as Egyptians, right? And if it seems far-fetched that after going through, inuim and difficulties, you still view yourself as a citizen, I could tell you about an interaction I had with a German Jew with many, many decades after the Holocaust that still was very proud of the fact that he is German, right? That's a reality. We Jews are very, very loyal, right? We fulfill that mitzvah of being grateful to our country, to our host country. We're very machmir in it. And sometimes we reach such an extent that we simply forget who we are. And the first step is recognize you are different. We're chosen. We have a different mission. We are not like them, right? This is the step number 1 of the redemption that we have to be mindful of. The second cup relates to the actual Exodus. And the third cup, the Birkat HaMazon, we've discussed, that symbolizes the idea of recognize that everything's from God. But that's, again, a very, very significant component of what we are trying to achieve on the Seder night. Recognize that we are different. Now, we talk about this is a night of transmitting to the next generation. And I think we all recognize the fact that to go ahead and inspire children and grandchildren to continue with what our tradition is about, you have to be in tune what that child or grandchild values as important, right? And as times change, and boy, are they changing quite fast, you have to adjust. And this is all, any educator could tell you that this is the challenge, right? No educator from 50 years ago had to deal with competing against a device that they are holding in their hand, right? The most that a child would perhaps have in hand that would distract the student were the kugelach, the 5, how would they call it?
Chamesh
Avanim, right? Perhaps that was the greatest challenge. Today, the student can have something in his hand that is far more entertaining than the Chamesh Avanim. So there has to be this ability that the educator has to adjust. You cannot say, what do you mean? This is how my grandfather did it. This is how my great-grandfather did it. I'm going to do it the exact same way. If you take that approach, good luck. You're not going to be transmitting anything because the next generation is going to find a way out. If you recognize the needs of the times and you realize that my goal is to be sure that there's Judaism 100 years from now, and I'm going to do whatever is necessary to go ahead and maneuver and adjust, then there will be continuity. Educator, adjust and assess who is sitting in front of you. And therefore, there's one of the most incredible statements of the Haggadah and perhaps of our tradition, is that just as we are told, listen here, you are entering into the night of transmitting. You want to be sure the next generation is aware of what the values are. You want to be sure that they value our tradition. Know that not all kids are the same. Keneged arba'a banim dibrat Torah. The Torah talks about different types of children. There is the wise one who's going to ask a question and who's going to want a ton of information, and you're going to have a deep desire to share with him everything. That's wonderful. But at the same table, you're going to have to go ahead and balance the fact that you're going to have there a child that unfortunately is a Russian. Now the nice thing is he's at the table, right? So you're going to have to go ahead and be sure that at least he picks up something, but the message is going to be very, very different. Then there is one that has absolutely no tools to even ask the question. And at ptach lo, you have the responsibility of developing an interest, right? For that child, be sure you go to Chocolate Charm and get those plagues because that is what's going to interest him. You do funny things because he simply is walking in with zero interest. If there's no interest, he's not going to sit through the lecture you give the Chacham. And they are sitting together here, and this sounds like a classroom, because a classroom, right, as a teacher you know, that sometimes it is mission impossible, where you have students that are sponges, and then you have, and are interested in every piece of information, and some of these bright kids are on a level that is very, very high in the amount of information you could provide them, and you are excited to hand over that information. But then you have kids that are, they might be in 11th grade, but they are 2-year-olds in some ways, right? Or they're second graders, somewhere in between, and you have to deal with them as little kids, and how does the educator do it? Well, turn to the Haggadah. The Haggadah tells you have to somehow manage. You have to somehow deal with this mission impossible of having different levels in the classroom, but you got to tailor it. You have to figure out a way, because if you think it's one size fits all, no one's going to be wearing anything in the next generation. You want to be sure that you transmit to the next generation. Keneged arba banim dibrat Torah. This is one of the most significant statements that we have of the Haggadah. Now, the Haggadah itself also tells us that you should know. We start Pesach preparation when the women, what? Rosh Chodesh? Maybe if you're going to a hotel, right? Then you start packing Rosh Chodesh. But my grandmother by Tu B'Shvat already. It was a heavy, real. Erev Pesach started already before Shkedia Porachas, right? But the truth is, we first heard the words of the Almighty, and the beginning for us is Rosh Chodesh. So one might think that we have this mitzvah transmitting it to the next generation from Rosh Chodesh, and we are told, no, that it is only to be done when you have something tangible in front of you. B'sha'a sheyesh matzah umaror munachim lefanecha. When there's something tangible, there's show and tell, where the kid, goes home and finds something interesting. Right in the inner city in the United States, usually a gun that the kid brings out, like something, or a needle, or something that is used often at home and considered very important by the parents. But there's a show and tell when there's something tangible. That is how you can transmit. Judaism cannot transmit values to the next generation if you take away everything that's tangible. Right? If it all becomes about concern for the world, which is important, right? And it all becomes about a tikkun olam, which is important. But we take away those tangible practices that come with specific details, how they are performed, when you do it, how much you eat, right? People like sharing with me the the video before Xmas when if Jews would have trees for Hanukkah and all the details, they make a lot of jokes about it. It is funny, but at the same time, we are here because of that funny. In other words, because we have specific details. How to bake the matzah, how to go ahead and how much to eat and what it should look like. Because we have these traditions and there are specifics and they are tangible, the next generation is going to develop an interest and the next generation is going to do it. That's how we preserve it. If it would only be the idea, if this would be a night when we talk about our history and there would be nothing in front of us, guess what? It would no longer be here. Lo amarti, how do you transmit? B'sha'a sheyesh, when you have in front of you, matzah umaror munachim lefanecha. It's a show and tell. Now, we talked about the fact that it has to have an impact on you. We learn through contrast. You appreciate things when there's a contrast, right? When do you appreciate a nice day, a blue sky, right? When you dealt or with good weather, right? With 21 degrees, when are you going to appreciate that eventually in May? You're going to appreciate that after several months, if you were here for several months in a row, right? Then you appreciate. When there's a contrast, you appreciate things. That is human nature, right? You view, when any photographer will tell you, that if you want to go ahead and take a good picture, when you have there a frame on the side, an actual frame, like pictures that are taken, you're here, you take it something through a gate, and on the outer part of the picture is the darkness of the gate, and then in the middle, it penetrates through a lit area. That's when you have yourself a good picture, when there's a contrast. This is a night. You want to have an impact? There has to be a contrast. How do we express a contrast? So we start off by sharing the bad, the ugly, right? We talk history. Well, we talk with the problematic times, and then after feeling that experience, because remember, this is not just sharing history, but it is something that we feel, we deeply feel, something we experience. After feeling the bad, then we can appreciate the good. And therefore, the Mishnah tells us that the proper way to have an Haggadah night and a Seder night is to start off with the bad, matchilin. You start with the ra, you start with the bad, and then you move on to the good. Okay, bad, good. Now, when you say bad, what bad are you talking about? So there are two opinions presented. One authority says, listen, the bad means physically that it was bad that they were enslaved in Egypt. That was quite bad. These were harsh times. We had no freedom, no control over ourselves, no independence, painful existence. Hours were crazy. Enslavement was overwhelming. That is the bad. The other authority says no, right? The other authority says, when we talk about the night of Exodus, this is not just a physical Exodus, this is a spiritual one. We begin our journey, our national journey, our journey of our mission, our journey that takes us to Mount Sinai, that takes us to the revelation, that takes us to our identity. So if we want to talk about the good of our spiritual identity, the bad has to be spiritual bad. What exactly would be spiritual bad? That we were once upon a time, we are descendants of pagans, and you have to feel it. Again, you have to go through some kind of conversion on this Seder night. Now, as a result of that, we mentioned both things in the Haggadah. We mentioned two bads. We start off mit chila ovdei avodat kochavim ayu avotenu, that our ancestors were pagan. We have to think about it. We had an emptiness, right? We had no direction. We have to feel that experience because we have to start with the bad. We also obviously mention the fact that avadim ayinu leparo b'mitzrayim. We do both. But then afterwards, after we have it, then we could go ahead and talk about Kervanu hamakom la'avodato, the Almighty brought us close to His service. So this is what we do on the Seder night. We want to go ahead and have that contrast, experience it. There's an interesting question that some authorities deal with, and that is, why is there no bracha on the Haggadah? You're going to perform a mitzvah, right? You're sharing the Haggadah Levincha. Why not say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam Asher Kiddishanu B'Mitzvot Savitzivanu, right? The Krota Galagid, whatever the language would be. So there are different explanations given. Some say that the whole Haggadah has a bracha. You don't make a bracha on a bracha. But others note, like the Chatam Sofer, that there is a bracha. There's a bracha at the end. Asher Galanu V'Galat Avotenu. Right before you drink that second cup. In some households, it takes a long time to get to it, right? You've been in different storim. My mother always shares with me how by her Yekish father, it took a very, 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 very long time. And for her, the Haggadah was having 2 fingers on the pages we read and 2 fingers on the pages we're going to get to. And most of the Haggadah was spent comparing and waiting for the right side to grow over the left side. That was by some, right? I come, Baruch Hashem, from a Litvish background, so we were not as painful as the Yekish. But but you get to that bracha eventually. Says a Chatam Sofer, that's the bracha on the Haggadah. Now, you can ask yourself, wait a second, you're telling me that we have a bracha on the Haggadah, but at the end? Do we usually not have brachot before? Says the Chatam Sofer, listen here. When a person converts to Judaism, right, a wonderful experience, an incredible act, they make a bracha when they go into the mikvah. When do they make the bracha? Afterwards. Why? Why do they not make the bracha before they go in? Not Jewish yet. So says Chatam Sofer, we're going through a conversion tonight. Remember, we're not just reading history, we are experiencing the process of going from Avodah Zarah to the relationship with God. Say the bracha afterwards. An incredible insight that he shares with us. So this is what the Haggadah is about the experience itself. Now, in one of our statements, one of the statements we say by lifting the cup is Vehi Sha'amda, right? That this commitment that God had to us, that we're going to survive, and we're not just going to survive, but we're going to leave Egypt b'rechush gadol, with great wealth, is something we are grateful because we are not just expressing events of the past, but this will symbolize that during all future challenges the people of Israel are going to go through, the result is we're going to survive. We're going to be around. It makes no difference how significant the challenge is. The Jewish people will be around. And also we are told that afterwards, don't think they're going to come out and for the next few centuries they're going to be in recovery mode, but rather v'acharei ken yetzu b'rechush gadol, with great wealth. This occurred as they left Egypt. They had physical wealth. This occurred as you relate to the spiritual wealth as well. They had the gift of the Torah itself, but don't think that this is something that is only then, but rather Vehi, this guarantee, will stand in all generations, because in all generations there are going to be those who are going to want to destroy us. This is what we are told. This idea that God promises that even after difficulty, as a nation, we're going to have Rechush Gadol. I see it very much as a message also for the past 75 years. In other words, look at this. Look at the state of the Jewish people. The state of the Jewish people. I've mentioned here how in the United States there's a lot of talk about affirmative action, right? And the fact that you had the African Americans, which were obviously mistreated, brought to the Americas under very difficult circumstances. They had some kind of form of enslavement, some of them, and in many cases this was not pleasant. You had all those, and so now comes the question that since LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act in 1965, should we go ahead and give them opportunities, right, and claim that there should be quotas in universities and workplace that we should be giving them due to the fact that opportunity was taken from them. So this is a question of debate that you could hear about in the U.S. quite often. So I remember once listening to a talk show by the name of Rush Limbaugh, and I'm not giving a stamp of approval on any political view, but there was one interesting thing that he did mention. He mentioned that when we talk about, he says, about people that suffered in the past and how much opportunity they need because there's a need for recovery. You know, they suffered 150 years ago, so therefore as a society we have an obligation. He says that when he hears this, he thinks about the Jewish people. That's what he said. And he says, look what they went through, and look what they're achieving today, right? So he was talking about the physically, this is quite incredible. a nation that went through the Shoah, 3 years later has a state. They could come to the New World and open businesses and open institutions. This is quite incredible. This is not natural. This is, there's a guarantee that even the most difficult and darkest times, the people of Israel are going to have a comeback because the Almighty said so. And it doesn't just relate to the physical, it relates to the spiritual. Look at the amount of Torah study we have today, right? Look at the amount of institutions we have, the education. We're doing some incredible things as a nation. This is what we are told in the Haggadah, and that's what we are grateful for. That difficulties do exist until we reach that Messianic time. But the reality is that God Almighty says, you know what? The Jews are going to overcome, and they're going to be able to inspire the world with that detail. This is what we are told. Now, there is... You know, when we want to express in the Haggadah our gratitude, we turn to several verses in the book of Dvarim, in a section that talks about the Bikurim, the first fruit, where we are supposed to express to the Kohen and to God our gratitude for the land of Israel. We take those verses and we analyze word by word, because in those verses we go through the history of our ancestors, and every word expressed there symbolizes and is describing specific details of our journey. So on a night that we have this obligation of expressing our gratitude, we go through those verses, right? So this is what we do of Arami Oved Avi. Where do these verses come from? Parashat Bikurim. Now, a few of the words, when we talk about Yaakov making his way down to Egypt, so we read, Vayered Mitzrayma, and the rabbis explain that Yaakov's journey down to Egypt were based on the fact that he was Anus Alpi Hadibur, which means he did not do it willingly. He had no choice. There was a dibur, there was a word of God, and he had no choice. He had to make his way down to Egypt because God said so. Okay, this is what Yaakov Avinu. And these are words that obviously we have to be mindful of as well, because we are outside of Israel, right? And thank God we have the ability to live in Israel today. Thank God there's a Jewish state. We're not there yet, right? This is not the Messianic era yet. Let's remember, things need to be fixed a little bit in Israel, right? We're waiting for a time when the news from Israel are not going to be just covering prime ministers and their personal activities. You know, these are things that should agitate anyone, not if he did it or not, but the fact that it's covered, the fact that this is what's being discussed is a reminder that we're not there yet, right? We want more, right? We could be a little bit demanding and perhaps greedy. We want a better state in Israel, right? We want a situation where there's a spiritual leader that is sensitive. There are things we want a little bit more. But nevertheless, what is clear for us is that home is not in Europe, home is not in America, home is not in Canada. We have to be mindful of it. And in some generations, we unfortunately experience some reminders. We, God willing, want to never have to go through that again, but we have to have reminders from within. And these words that when we are outside of our home, we are here, right? And we're doing good things, but we are anus al pi hadibur, meaning it's not somewhere, we're not in our ideal state, but we are forced to spend time here until the Almighty makes it clear, now is time to make your way back. We are anus al pi hadibur. Okay, so there's a basic message here of how we view our presence here. So there's something very interesting, that there was a great mystic who lived about 800 years ago. His name was Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Now, this Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid was the first, meaning there's another person who lived about some 300 years ago, that his name was Rabbi Yehuda, and he was a Chassid too. And so it's the first Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. So just to make it clear, the second one was the one that landed up in Israel, purchased an area in the old city, right? And he arrived in Jerusalem with many followers. He was a mystical individual. Unfortunately, he got sick as he arrived. 3 days later, he died. And the area where his community was eventually destroyed by some Muslims, and it was known as the Churvat Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. They eventually built a synagogue there in 1865, and that's the churva. So you will find people saying Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, it's the first Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid wrote a whole booklet of practices, of things that we should avoid or things we should do to protect ourselves. So if you ever heard the idea that a young boy does not go out with a girl who shares the same name as his mother, have you ever heard of that idea?
Yeah.
Where on earth did that come from? That's it, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. The mother. You don't just take my son, you take my name as well, right? Okay, so that's Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. And there's a whole list of these practices, and some of them become extremely holy, and we all are concerned about, and other of them we ignore because he talks about not having a bathroom in your house. So there's some odd things there that are mentioned. Authorities have struggled with it. Now, among the things that appear in the works of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid are the fact that if you build a new home, the first night, don't sleep there. Don't sleep there, it's dangerous. What you do is, now again, this is a mystic. It's a realm that I have no idea what on earth is flying there, but I have, a level of respect for these concepts. So I'm not mocking it, I'm just sharing with you what he expresses. He says that night number one, what you do is you bring 2 chickens, a male and a female, let them walk around, let them walk around the house, and then after the chickens walk around the house overnight, then you could go ahead and move in. Fine. So some give an explanation to it, that perhaps there was a decree that house needs to be, you have to punish the first gever that lives there. Now, we have a tradition that we also call a chicken, a gaver. So perhaps the decree that was supposed to be on the person transfers to the chicken. This is what's being told. Chatam Sofer was asked, how much of it do I have to take into consideration? Chatam Sofer says, listen, I prefer not working with these things at all. But I'll tell you one message you can learn from it, meaning he takes it in a very different direction. And he says the following, that you should know, when you build a house in Eretz Yisrael, when you settle Eretz Yisrael, there's a mitzvah. It's an incredible act to have that opportunity of living there, of building it, of being part of expanding the Holy Land. That's an incredible mitzvah. But if you recognize that as a mitzvah, you have to recognize the fact that building a nice big house outside of Eretz Yisrael is a problem. Now, if you have to live there and you have a family and you need room for them, that's fine. We are doing it anus al pi hadibur. But just this vast expansion for no reason, thinking that you're going to be here and you're going to let your kids move in there, that is something that is problematic. Perhaps you need protection for such an attitude, he throws in. This is what he tells us. Now, this is a message that Chatam Sofer wants us to always be mindful of, that we are here, yes, and yes, it's okay, nowhere are we told that you have to live in discomfort. You live in comfort, but there's a difference between comfort and royalty, right? In other words, Jews should not be living in a Buckingham Palace. Why? Because it's an understanding. This is not our homeland. There should be a reminder. People have at home, some people have a zecher lachurban at home. Something that reminds them we're grateful. Grateful to God that we're here in this good country, no question. Grateful to this country, that overall it is a wonderful place for Jews to live in. We're grateful 100%, but this is not home. Anus al pi hadibur. So this is an important message that the Chatam Sofer wants us to be mindful of, and the Haggadah wants us to be mindful of. Now, at the end of the Haggadah, we end off with the bracha, and we say that this is a night where we have to be lehalel, leshabeach, levarech. Now, what is the difference between all those terms? No time for that, but I'll focus on 2 of them. Hallel and bracha. The rabbis say the following, that a person should not say Hallel every single day. Kol Omer, the rabbis use harsh words that's considered blasphemous to say the complete Hallel every single day. This is what we are told. On the other hand, the rabbis tell us that if a person says the Psukei de Zimra, if a person says the Ashrei, which is the core of Psukei de Zimra every single day, you have a portion in the world to come. Okay? So Hallel every day? No, don't do that. Ashrei every single day, that's wonderful. That's when you have a portion in the world to come. What's the message behind that? So the commentators explain that Hallel is for the supernatural, right? And we have to be grateful for the supernatural. Our existence is supernatural. The Exodus was supernatural. No question about that. You're sitting there, you're going to read about Yetziat Mitzrayim, you're going to read about Kriyat Yam Suf, say the Hallel. But to believe that we only praise God when we experience the supernatural, there's a problem there. Right? To believe that I'm only grateful to God if there are nisim and nisim that occur every single day, there's a problem there. Why? Because you are basically indicating that when I look at the natural course of the world, when I look at nature, no need to praise him there, because that's natural. When I see him intervening and changing nature, then I have to say, "Oi, that's wonderful, hashgacha pratis, that's wonderful." There's a problem there. A good Jew, you know what a good Jew does? A good Jew looks at the natural course of things, looks at how things develop in order. There's an order in nature, right? The seasons are in order, right? It's quite incredible that the allergies know exactly that late April they have to start causing mitzaras, right? There's a course in nature, right? Aleph, Beis, Gimel, everything's in order, like the Ashrei. The Ashrei symbolizes the idea that I see God in nature and I realize this is not nature, this is not occurring on its own. There's something incredible here, there's wisdom here. Let me study this world because I realize that there is an artist behind it, that there's a creator. Appreciating what is known as nature, that is what you do every single day. Hallel has its time. Hallel has its time. But every single day you say the Psukkah de Zimra. This is the message. That's the difference between Hallel and Bracha. Hallel is praising him for some incredible things. We do it at times. No question about that. But Bracha is the idea that we recognize that God bestows blessing every single minute. That everything you experience, right? You go out and there's some fresh air, you get your lungs get the oxygen, your coffee, your blood gets the caffeine. Anything you get, that is a bracha, because God is giving us, through what we know as nature, some incredible things. That is what we have to do on us every single day. That's the difference between these terms. So Pesach is to inspire us, not just for that night, but to tell us about our identity, who we are, how to view the world. So this is an incredible evening, and we want to be sure that our deep appreciation of who we are does not end today, but it continues in the future as well, right? We think about the future, and we want to transmit it. So a successful Seder night is a night where it is indeed transmitted, and I wish everyone that we have a Chag Sameach, a Chag Kasher Sameach, and we succeed in our mission of being sure that these incredible values that we have and are part of our life live on for many, many generations. Thank you for coming. Chag Kasher Sameach. We will meet again after Pesach. Thank you.